Welcome to another episode of the Fertility Workshop. Here we cover all things male fertility and focus on not just the cutting edge research, but things that will help yourself whilst navigating your own journey. Now, today we're looking at the 10 enemies within IVF. Now, just to be clear, guys, I'm not saying that IVF itself is the enemy. Okay, we're lucky that it's here to help us men who are not fertile, for those of us who are later in life and anywhere in between. Now, this episode is about the structural and human obstacles inside IVF as you journey through it. That increases the risk of failure, makes it an unpleasant journey. And it's not because, again, IVF doesn't work, but because of how it's often approached, delivered, and really how you're guided throughout that process. So let's kick off with enemy number 1, which is fertility improvement is not the default. What does that mean? It means that when you see a doctor and you get the results back from your sperm analysis, to be honest, a lot of men don't get follow-up calls and they don't get sat down and spoken to about what's on their sperm analysis. Now, there are going to be those of you who are, and in that circumstance, they'll sit you down and they'll speak to you about your sperm analysis and they'll say, okay, so you're fine, you're okay, or you're borderline, or yeah, you're actually subfertile, and we would recommend that you consider IVF, especially as you've had no success in the last 6 months, 12 months. There'll be different advice for different age groups. And that's the default. There's no prompting from the doctor really of much worth that you can actually, your fertility isn't static and it doesn't just decrease year on out, every single year as you age. That's not true. So there are a lot of things that you can do to boost your sperm health. And no one is really spoken to about that. They'll just point you in the direction of IVF. That's one experience that I certainly had. I'll tell you what happened to me. So I got my sperm analysis back. This is my very first one about 5 years ago. And basically at the time, I didn't know what the heck I was looking at. And it was one of those ones where I wasn't really spoken to by a doctor. You've probably had a similar experience. If you haven't, I'm very envious and I want to know kind of what health program you're a part of, what health service within which country. But the story is that I got my information back. I didn't really read it because I didn't know what was going on, but I just read the notes at the end of the sperm analysis below all the markers. And it just said that I had normal zoospermia. And I was like, great, so there's nothing wrong with me, I'm fine. But a few years later, in fact, it was just, I found this one particular one just 1 year ago, because I literally just didn't look back at this first one. And I look at it now and I know that it wasn't fine. I was above infertile markers, but really 5 years ago when I was a lot younger, I had worse stats than what I have now. And it's worrying that no one spoke to me about some very borderline morphology, average motility, not very good motility, and not a great count, to be honest with you. And I didn't get spoken to. No one followed up. No one spoke to me. And I didn't get spoken to about the fact that my sperm can be improved, that I can take control of my own fertility and boost it. I only started thinking about it when I read a section of a book which was written by Rebecca Fett. It starts with the egg, very famous book. If you haven't read it, you want to read it. That has so much in there. And I think she's updating it every year or two. And just more stuff is being put in there, more research done. And, I have a lot of time for Rebecca Fett because she put me on this path. And the success we've had, I attribute a lot to her. So, if you're listening, Rebecca, thank you so much. But to come back to where things that I only started, improving my sperm because of reading books that were outside the sphere of medical programs, medical infrastructure. And that frustrates me. But at the same time, that's the world we live in. So that's, of course, why I'm doing this podcast. So that's the first enemy within IVF, the fact that you won't get sat down, told to how to do it. And if they do mention it, it's generally some kind of just general whimsical advice is given to you. Okay, just get healthier, lose weight. That'll help. Eat better, exercise more, get healthy, sleep better. And it's just so generic. Anyone on the street could tell you that. It doesn't actually help or add any value. So that's my what I would say is the first enemy within IVF. A quick note before we continue. This episode is sponsored by the Supplement Blueprints, a free training we created for men who want to improve sperm health and stop guessing with supplements. We break down what works and what actually matters for male fertility, forms, dosages, timing, and the label tricks most brands use to look premium while under-delivering. If you want to join the free session, just go to thefertilityproject.life/blueprints. That's thefertilityproject.life/blueprints. That does bring us to the second enemy within IVF, and that is lack of support networks and guidance within the area, the industry as a whole. And this is going to be a lot of people are going to be nodding their head to this if you are going through IVF. But if you haven't gone through IVF yet or begun to look at that, then know that you're expected to navigate the complexities, the medical complexities, the emotional aspects, the financial parts of it, with very little strategic guidance. There's not a lot of support out there that covers all of that. And to paint that picture of how it kind of looks, we were rejected twice by the National Health Service in the UK, so we had to look at the private industry after that. And we had to, of course, search for an IVF clinic. Now, it's important to note that there's different clinics for different people, for men, women, and for different procedures. So there might be some that specialize more in male infertility, and within that, they might have a very experienced staff that do ICSI, TESE, and a whole range of other things. They might do male PRP. They might do a full plethora of things that can help a man's fertility. However, there is the chance that you might speak to a clinic, get on with the doctor, and their facilities aren't really the best ones for you. So I'll give you a real life example of that. Now, I did mention that we were rejected by the National Health Service. We looked for an IVF clinic, and when we were looking for them, we got rejected by some because some have minimum thresholds, right? So we've actually found one that was cheap, affordable, but they wanted you to be pretty fertile in order to embark on that journey with them. So it was quite frustrating to be told no from people you wanted to give money to, and can be disheartening as well. I'll just add, because you're thinking, God, even these guys are saying no to me. I'm looking at giving them £1,000, but yet here we are. So we continue searching, and we found ones that were, and sorry, just to sort of add to that, the reason why they will reject you is because they want to have a certain success rates that they can publish for their marketing team, right? They need to show that they're having lots of success, because typically you're just told that, oh, you want to find an IVF clinic that they have a proven track record of providing success, and also they aren't too expensive. Those are the two probably biggest things that people focus on when they begin looking at IVF clinics. And it's not terrible advice, it's just entirely incomplete. So if you have a challenging case, that you can be rejected. Now, we did find an IVF clinic after all that rejection, and unfortunately it didn't work out. We did 2 cycles with them, and their services were pretty average. We paid a lot of money, but when we got the 2 cycles done and they didn't work out, then we had to get creative. Then we had to start looking at how can we really find the best path for our journey. And we must have spoken to about 8 different clinics, all each speaking to different doctors. We attended a whole range of webinars for people who are trying to show off their services, doctors doing that for their clinic. And there was a lot of searching done, and we looked at many different countries, and we looked at different costs, different services available, and what people specialized in. And then we found options, and we went on with those options, and we got much better success with much less costs. So, who guides you through all that? What's the solution here, Marcus? It's all well and good telling me it's going to be confusing, but I'm just going to tell you outright, the thing that you need to do is to start talking to people who have already done this journey before you. You need to start getting into that crowd. And it doesn't matter if it's Facebook groups on, Facebook. It doesn't matter if it's social media. It doesn't matter if it's just reaching out. Maybe there's someone at work you heard went through IVF, and they will be the ones who have trod the path for you and will be able to give you advice on what to do. Now, of course, every single person's journey within IVF and fertility as a whole is quite different. So it's not going to be quite as clear cut as just shadowing just copying what they did. Of course not. But they will be able to give you, just like in this episode here, ideas and let you know ahead of time what the issues are going to be. So that's really ultimate remedy to that problem. And what I've touched on there actually takes us on to enemy number 3. Enemy number 3 is gatekeeping. Gatekeeping, right? So what does that mean? Well, you remember I just told you about the fact that some clinics can reject you because your fertility isn't as high as they want it to be, and therefore they see you as a bit of a risk in terms of hurting their success rate stats that they publish on their website, on their marketing reports, and anywhere in between. For National Health Services, they also need to publish success so that they, the powers that be can see that the budget that they put into the system was justified and there's a certain return on that investment. So often the ones that need help the most are the ones that are left behind first. And that is, it's not a nice place to be in. We've been there. Not a nice place to be in at all. And if that's you listening to this, my friend, then know that you have my ear and my understanding as well. It's not an easy place to be in. I mean, I've already shared that story, to be honest with you, that we approached some clinics before and we were just rejected. There were some doctors we had to sit down with and we had to speak to them about how my wife has endometriosis stage 4, a couple of other issues, polyps and whatnot, because that was the thing that got us into IVF in the first place. And we were told by doctors, okay, you need to have these surgeries beforehand, or we're not happy to do this. So they will filter you out. I think the filtering out is a lot more honest than the gatekeeping. The filtering out, what I'm referring to there, is the fact that, okay, you're not, their services, their clinic is not the right fit for your individual circumstances. But the gatekeeping is the fact that you report that an AMH level, for example, in your partner is below a certain threshold. They won't even talk to you. They'll just say, sorry, we won't be able to accommodate you. And that's, as I said before, disheartening. And that can take a toll. But understand that there is hope. The solution to that is kind of what we did, is just look around at different clinics and don't limit yourself to these kind of bubbles. It's got to be in the same country. I mean, for some of you, it's not even going to have to be, it doesn't have to be on the same continent. A lot of people that I speak to, who are doing IVF in the US, they'll look at Mexico, they'll look at South America. South America, you've got to be a bit more careful because of Zika virus, but that has definitely died down a lot over recent years. And you've got Southeast Asia for those in Greater Asia, Australia. There are lots and lots of options. So don't limit yourself to just your country. Don't limit yourself to thinking, okay, we can only have 2 cycles because it's going to cost this much. Because there are quality IVF clinics that are a lot cheaper than others. So for example, in the UK, I think for the 2 cycles, well, it was definitely above £25,000 for the 2 cycles. One was failed, so didn't pay the full amount. So we didn't go ahead with the egg collection. So that was 1.5, let's say. And that doesn't necessarily include travel costs, medication, etc. And then we went to Prague, and to get a dual stimulation package, we paid, I think, about 3,500 off the top of my head, euros. So it really goes to show that there is very broad range of packages, costs, and services available. And the ones in Prague were way better than the ones in the UK, by the way. So yeah, bear that in mind. Although we do have a couple of horror stories about Prague. So, don't just say, oh, it's no brainer, go to Prague. Yeah, it's great to look at. They've got fantastic services there, but just do your due diligence. A quick reminder, if supplements still feel confusing, or you're not sure what actually matters, the free supplement blueprint walks you through it step by step. It helps you understand what works, what doesn't, and where to focus so you're not wasting time or money. You'll find it at thefertilityproject.life/blueprints. Okay, so enemy number 4, budgets. Again, I blabbed prematurely about costs there. But again, I've literally just spoken about the cost between the UK and Prague. If you think about the US, I'm aware that you have different insurance packages and that will shape your fertility journey. I've got to say, I've come across a lot of different situations with insurance providers, and I mean, it's pretty limiting and tough with some of them. It's as crazy as, okay, well, as long as you get 1 embryo per cycle, then, that's fine. Get that implanted, and then you don't need to do anything else. And only then after that fails can you do another one. So you'd only be continuing doing fresh cycles rather than doing a freezing protocol to accumulate a certain amount of embryos to then, because you're only getting older, quote unquote, and then you could then use that bank of embryos to then repeatedly have children over the next 2, 3, or 4 years. So, I appreciate that every country is a bit different. But if we look at the cost in the US, I mean, there are between $20,000 and $40,000, depending on what you do. You go to Mexico and it will just cost not even half that. There is the aspect that you have to take into account, the flights, the inconvenience, the travel away from work, whatever it may be, and of course, accommodation there, and so on and so forth. But if you look at my example, it was over $15,000 for just one cycle. Again, doesn't include all those medication costs, travel costs, because we were having to commute into London. Cost us like £88 for a train ticket each for both of us to go, so 160 quid there and back per an appointment. And then you compare it to Prague, where we were paying €3,500 for dual stimulation. Know that if you're in Australia, Southeast Asia is there, Malaysia's there for you. We're actually doing a project interviewing and doing tours of different IVF clinics in Malaysia as we speak. That's where we're based. And there's a lot of options and a lot of reputable establishments. There are things like the Ultimate fertility centers, which are these luxury centers, and they cost an arm and a leg. But they'll also include, I'm only saying this because it might be relevant to some people out there, and they'll include, all the bells and whistles, all the quote unquote cutting edge stuff. But again, don't just trust their marketing department. So budgets. If you have a budget and you say, okay, we've only got enough for one cycle, maybe just hold off for a moment and look into other things you can do. Look at other countries, other doctors, begin attending webinars put on by clinics and getting those one-to-one sessions with doctors as well. Begin to look at that. And again, there's lots of research you can do online. On Reddit, there's loads of stuff. Facebook groups are devoted to international cycles. There's a whole range of things that can be done. Enemy number 5, time. Time, yeah, big one. So there's the obvious ones, which are biological time, the systems time, so referrals within whichever country's infrastructure you're a part of. The psychological time, that can feel like a long time, right? It can feel like things flash by really quickly, depending on how much stress or how much worry you're in. And then there's also the lifetime management, which is that you have to take the time to, if you're going to go to the gym, you've got to take time out of your day. If you've got to do injections, you've got to do those for the IVF cycle. And there's also relationship strain. You're going to have to put more time into your relationship probably to ensure that everything stays as good as it possibly can, because there's going to be a lot of worry and stress that are part of this journey. Now, a couple of warnings about that, again, from our journey. So we lost a lot of time trying to get access to the National Health Service, essentially getting free cycles from the National Health Service in the UK. And it was a big waste of time. Those guys are slow as shit. Those guys they're not very focused, and they didn't really do, the administration of it, absolutely terrible. So that is one thing to bear in mind, that the cost of not getting things done pronto can be more than the actual financial cost. And that's going to be an individual decision. That's going to be something that you're going to have to weigh up yourselves. So just so you know, we probably lost about over a year to that process, and it didn't do anything for us. Of course, you can try and save money, but as I said, to begin at least looking at alternatives during that process, that would have been the smart thing to do. Starting to look at cheaper options internationally, etc. So that was time wasted. And also, I think there is an important note in our journey to be had, which is that when we first went private and we had that aborted cycle, it was clear that the follicles, that's the eggs before they become eggs, those cells, they were not responding to the protocol, the injections, the medication protocol that we were doing. And we actually made a good decision. And for our first cycle, it was very good. And actually, I think one of the nurses that we spoke to about scan results was very helpful. And she said, yeah, it's not looking good. And we were thinking, well, should we go ahead then? She was like, yeah, I mean, it's your decision, but it's not the right size, which is in contrast to another experience that we had, which I'll bring up later. So we actually saved time by cancelling men's money. We learned what we learned because it was our first IVF cycle about the medication, what was good, what was bad. My wife was then, labeled as a poor responder and a slow responder. So then the protocol evolved, and then we went to the next cycle, which unfortunately wasn't successful, but we did get some eggs collected. So, all these incremental steps, they are of value, although they can be heartbreaking and frustrating. So again, that's another way to save time and money. Don't be afraid to look at your doctor in the eye and ask them, what do you recommend? Because, and I'll bring this story up in a bit, some of them will just go on regardless. It can be really poor. And always remember, you're in the driver's seat and you're the one making decisions. And your wife will be under the influence of a lot of medication. Her hormones will be crazy. So you'll have to be the calm one. Even if you don't want to be in the driver's seat, you'll be the one potentially make the decisions from the coolest head. Quick pause before we continue. This episode is also supported by a free session we're running called Sperm Analysis Mastery, how to read your results properly. In this session, I walk you through my own semen analysis reports, the real numbers, real changes, and explain what each marker actually means, the volume, concentration, motility, morphology, liquefaction, and what clinics often don't explain. Most men are told they're normal or borderline without ever being taught how to interpret the report, how to track improvement over time, or what the numbers actually mean. If you want to understand your results instead of guessing, you can join the free session at thefertilityproject.life/free resources. That's thefertilityproject.life/free resources. And that brings us on to enemy number 6, the hormonal influence and the emotional volatility for both of you. The hormonal influence will be, your wife will be subjected to that when it comes to the medication. And that can happen on different things for different people. But the emphasis I want to put on there is that the protocol for the medication given to your wife, they can vary strongly and they can be a lot longer than some. So for example, there was one IVF cycle that we did, I think it was 2023, November, we were starting this one. And it was really easy to remember because she started taking some medication a few months ahead of time. So before all the injections and things like that. Although this was an injection actually, but it was just once per month. So she took that. She took it twice. She was told to take it every month prior to coming to the clinic to begin the IVF cycle. And she did the first one. Her sleep was reduced and affected very strongly. She was sleeping for about 3 hours a night. She then took the next months and she carried on just doing what the doctor told her, right? And then afterwards, we were just like, this is ridiculous. Sleep is probably the most important thing to egg quality you can get out there. So what's the point? So we actually just stuffed the whole thing. We said, we're not going to do that protocol and we're going to delay the cycle for a couple of months so that she can have 3 or 4 months of better sleep leading up to that time. So that's a very good example of how your wife's hormones can be affected. And it's not her fault that her hormones are going up and down. She can't sleep. Can you imagine? You sleep 2 months for 3 hours. That was crazy. And I remember she was not in a good place and it was very hard. It took a big toll on our relationship and a difficult time between both of us. So that's one example of how medication can influence your wife, and others are going to be, tiredness, irritability. It can influence just even throughout the day how she feels. So you've got to be aware of that, and the symptoms, the fatigue, and anything else that can be brought about. You need to have a conversation with your wife ahead of time before she starts taking the medication. And you need to sit down and talk about what can be done in order to make this journey more bearable, more comfortable. Prevention is better than cure, and dealing with things before the fact, up your hands, is a lot easier than scramble for different ideas, etc., as things are going on. So to have a straight up conversation and say, look, hormonally, you're going to be, all over the place. That is going to affect your mood. We know that. And how do we prevent that? How do we ensure that things aren't going to trigger you and they're not going to disrupt how you live? Because she might have to be going to work through all this as well, So it's a big ask and it is tough. And emotional volatility, I mentioned that separately because it's not just going to be your wife who's going to go through different emotions. I've been through some cycles where I just kind of shut down and I'm just a bit numb and I don't really feel things at the beginning. I used to white knuckle it thinking it was going to be a short journey. So I would just put off all my emotions, not really acknowledge them. And, we all use different tools we have available. And I didn't really like talking about it. So, how do you control your own emotions? The anxiety of, is this cycle going to work or not? I don't have enough money in the bank to pay for any more cycles. This is it. So if this doesn't happen, how am I going to have a family? All these things will come up. And of course, you've got a number of different options. You can try and improve your sperm naturally. You can try for sperm donors. You can get sperm donor involved. You can adopt. There's a whole range of different things that you can do to look at having a family, right? And it is worth noting that those are out there. So you don't feel like it's the end of the world if it were not to happen. If you don't have that doomsday kind of feeling, that anxiety, that means that you're going to A, feel better, B, help your wife throughout the whole process and make the entire journey a lot better as well. So that's the extreme. But then also you are going to have the financial burden, the stress, the pressure at work potentially. And you've got to be aware of all of that. And you can look at counseling and therapy. Be careful who you choose. You can go down that route, of course. But of course, you can also meet up with friends more often, have a chat with them. And that sense of like getting involved with your community, your friends and family, and being in a good place socially, that can help unburden you tremendously as well. So those are things that you can look at. Enemy number 7, emotional exhaustion being misread as compliance. What does that mean? Do you remember I told you that I was shut down on a few of my cycles and I just put my hands up and felt defeated. I just went along with whatever the doctor was saying, etc. Not my proudest moment because to be honest, I needed to be better. But I felt exhausted from doing a number of different cycles and I felt numb to it. I had to shake it off. I had to make sure that I was still on point. Now, later on, because my wife has also been emotionally exhausted and she'll just sit in, sometimes I've seen her just sit in a doctor's appointment and just be nodding her head. And she just looks like a bit of a shell of herself. And that's important to be able to stay vigilant and for you to be the one asking questions, for you to get clarity on what's going on, talking about different ideas, brainstorming at the very first doctor's appointments about what was going to be the best for you and your wife. Especially if your wife's going through, one example that I have is that, we just came out of a ultrasound scan leading up to an egg collection. And my wife hates it. I mean, quite frankly, I can't blame her. And they basically, just so you're unclear, if you haven't started this journey, they have to put an ultrasound like tool/wand thing into the vagina in order to read how large the potential eggs are, the follicles are. And afterwards, she just gets a massive, she hates it. She gets a massive adrenaline dump after, and she isn't present. And so it's at that time that you need to be vigilant and you can't let yourself fall into any defeated traps or to not know what's going on with your partner, because this is emotional exhaustion. It's not just for you, right? It's also for your other half, because it's a joint journey. People really don't understand how much of a team you need to be during this process. I remember, of course, I put my hand on her shoulder, make sure she was all right, etc. And she was, all right after the thing. Then we went to the doctor after the scan and we went into the doctor's appointment. And, she wasn't really taking note of how large the follicles were. She wasn't really focusing on the trigger date, when would be appropriate, et cetera, et cetera. So it is important for each of you to have each other's back. And if you have a problem with, you say you have a blockage in your testes or something like that, equally your wife has to be there for you as well, because that's going to be a horrible procedure. And that is 100% the case. To be clear, if you've had a semen analysis and weren't really shown how to read it, the free sperm analysis mastery session walks you through it step by step. It helps you understand what the numbers actually mean and how to track your improvement. You'll find it at thefertilityproject.life/free resources. Enemy number 8, doctors making the wrong call. So doctors are human. Let's start off with that. They can make mistakes. If you've been in the IVF game long enough, then would have spoken to different doctors, and you might have already observed doctors making the wrong call or perhaps not the best call. it is somewhat linked to the previous point, which is that you are in the driver's seat and you have to be vigilant during this process. They will never be able to make the best decision for you necessarily. Perhaps in their eyes, the best medical decision, but just remember, if you put 3 different doctors into, to discuss a problem, they'll come up with 4 different opinions, right? So they do vary in terms, there's no one answer, but know that you are the person who's best qualified to make decisions for yourselves. You know your budgets, you know your limits, and the doctor does not. Now, doctors, where they go wrong or can go wrong. So, medication protocols that don't suit you and your wife's situation. The going ahead with the cycle, which doesn't look like it's going to yield results, too hopeful. Trigger timing decisions as well, that can definitely be a big one. And the reason why, that's got me thinking about something which I'm going to share with you in just a moment, that always kind of gets me out of my present moment because it was such a specific experience. But the other point that you do need to just be aware of is that you can have premature donor egg recommendations. A quick example of that is that after our first 2 cycles with the first clinic, we were told to look at donor eggs. And I somewhat understand, in hindsight, I understand somewhat why they recommended that, because in the context of how much things cost in the UK, and of course how much strain, it doesn't matter where you go, how much strain it's going to take on you emotionally, on your relationship, etc. But the truth is we have multiple embryos now banked in cryo storage, and we were told by that clinic to not bother. Basically, they said it was exceedingly unlikely that we would ever have any embryos and that we should look at donor eggs. And when I reflect back, yeah, sure, it would have been easier to get donor eggs. Still not guaranteed, of course. And that will always be an option for us going forward if we don't have enough children, etc. But again, that was a piece of advice that I can't say is an error or a wrong call, but to kind of shut down the idea of you won't be able to use your own egg, when actually we have been able to do that, it might have been a bit premature. Perhaps mention it as an option rather than is the only answer would have been more appropriate. And, for anyone who gets like the news that, oh yeah, you're going to have to get a donor egg because you're not going to be able to conceive naturally, or, with your own eggs and stuff, that's a disheartening moment. So I'm with you there, brother. But look at what you can do. And I will share a few things about what you can do in just a moment if you are in that situation. But do you remember how I sort of bumbled about and I was hesitating and I told you I was out at the present moment because I was thinking about trigger timing decisions? So for those of you who don't know, at some point in IVF, after you go through a couple of weeks of these daily injections, often morning and evening, there is going to be a day where you have to inject a trigger protocol into your wife, or she'll do it herself. And that's when you stop the egg from growing, the follicle from growing, and it somewhat freezes the size in time of the lead follicle and the other ones that are just behind it, so that in a couple of days, they can then do the egg collection where they do the surgery. Right? So a wrong call a doctor made with us was that the lead follicle was 14 millimeters wide. And for those of you who don't know, that's very small. Typically, it needs to be between 18 and 21 millimeters. Sometimes 17 millimeters is acceptable. But you've got to note that the lead follicle, which is the largest one, 14 millimeter, that's the biggest one. So the ones behind it will be like 13, 12, right? So the doctor told us to use the trigger on a day that didn't have to be that day. We could have waited a few more days in order for them to grow, or we could have just aborted the cycle, but there was no discussion had on this one about that. And honestly, we didn't do, it was our own fault. We shouldn't have listened to, you trust doctors, trusting that they're going to make the right decisions for you. But as I said, only you can take the best decision for yourself. So we froze stupidly the lead follicle at 40 millimeters. A couple of days later, surprise, surprise, none of the eggs made it because they were just too small. So we completely wasted the money and time with that cycle. And we still have a complaint going through to this day about that cycle. We don't know if we're ever going to see anything. In a sense, they can't take responsibility for it because then they would be admitting that they made a mistake, and there's legal ramifications for that. So it's often very hard to get compensation from clinics. So just bear that in mind. Now, in terms of what you can do, again, you're doing the right thing by listening to other people's stories. That's a very important part of this. the knowledge that you need to be careful how you approach the trigger time. That's going to be invaluable. So when you're working your way through that and you're seeing the doctor, you know that the lead follicle needs to be at least 18 millimeters in size. And you know that you have the power to abort a cycle if things aren't looking like they're going to happen. And you need to have those conversations with the doctor. Don't just go on autopilot. And again, do all the research that is in relation to your specific conditions, and more information will come out. It will arrive. So enemy number 9, doctors not listening to your needs and wants. It's the lack of individualization. So doctors not listening to your needs and wants. A lot of these doctors, they believe they know best, and they've been educated, and they have a set way of doing things. And that's fine. Of course, they're qualified, but are they approaching a protocol that is best for you? Is the clinic the best clinic to take into account your needs? So a few questions you can ask yourself is, do they provide individual services? Do they have an administrator that's personal to you that can correspond with you and communicate with you throughout the whole process? Do they have more holistic practices? Are you more into that? Are you interested in doing acupuncture before and after egg collection? Because that's been verified, that's been researched, confirmed that actually helps with implantation. What about the frequency of the scans? Is that flexible? Is there flexibility there? Is that included in the package that you're paying for? The fact that you can add more scans, or will you have to pay extra? Or will they consider it because they might be a very busy clinic? What about the embryo acceptance rates? What about mosaic embryos? A lot of you don't really know about that. And that's an interesting part of the IVF journey, is that some of this stuff comes out. But the interesting point about embryos is embryos are classed in, well, they're basically broken down into what's a good quality embryo, what's a poor quality embryo, and anything in between. You can have an embryo that is 4AA, right? And what does that mean? It means that the embryos arrived at 4 days old, and the A is the standard of quality of the part that will become the baby, and then the other A is going to be the quality of the placenta. And that's a fantastic kind of spot to be in. We've got one of those. Very happy it's happened. It's very reassuring when you get that back, but you might not get that back. You might get 3BB or 3BC or something like that, which is a poorer quality embryo. And depending on the clinic's own standards, they might discard an embryo that they think is not good enough quality. And it's important to have that conversation with them before the fact, because they might just throw it out really without asking your permission, because in their medical opinion, it's not high enough quality. And that's okay. You've got to listen to the doctors. But a lot of these embryos are going to be like mosaic embryos. And a mosaic embryo is basically an embryo that has the ability to self-correct, although it is of poor quality, right? I'm going to create a different, that's a big subject. I'm going to go into that in more in depth in another episode. But the reason why I bring it up is because if you have a history of having poorer embryos, and yes, you can seek to have better quality embryos through lifestyle changes and everything else, but maybe you are going to have to implant a few times and wait for the ones that is going to do well, the one that is going to self-correct as it grows. That's why it's important. It can't self-correct and grow if the clinic just throws it out because it's below a minimum par. You know what I mean? So you have to bear that in mind as well. Now, a little example of that within our own journey is that it's a very basic one and will apply to a lot of people, which is fighting our choice of medication, our choice of protocol. We had some great success with one protocol with one clinic, and we simply wanted to replicate it again. But they saw fit to introduce other ones that I mentioned before, prevented my wife from sleeping, etc. And it took a negative toll on her. And we had to keep making it clear that we wanted, because even before we started doing that medication, we said we want to do the same protocol as before, but they were saying, no, we want to add this one because we believe it's going to be better. And in the end, we just had to say, look, if we're going to go with you guys, we're not doing this medication, like put our foot down. And then we went ahead and did it. And unfortunately, that cycle didn't work out. However, know that, you need to find the right doctor who is going to accommodate you to what you think is best. Amen. I know why you're listening to this channel. And my guess is you're looking for a clear path forward. Just want to briefly mention something we've built for men who want more clarity, structure, and control over their fertility. It's a course called Male Fertility Mastery. It's grounded in evidence-based fertility research and what I've applied and refined over more than 4 years navigating my own fertility journey. Not theory, but my own lived experience. It hasn't just worked for me, it's helped a lot of other men improve their sperm health too. This course shows you how to meaningfully improve sperm health over a 3-month period. It's built around how sperm actually change and organizes what matters into clear, practical steps you can follow to transform your own fertility. We focus on understanding your sperm markers, improving them through evidence-based habits, and removing the guesswork so you're not, say, jumping from supplement to supplement. The goal isn't more information. It's a clear plan you can actually follow. The first module is available to explore so you can see how it's structured before committing, and it comes with a 100% no-hassle money-back guarantee, so there's no pressure to continue if you're dissatisfied in any way. If you want to take a proper look, you can find it at thefertilityproject.life/MFM course. That's thefertilityproject.life/MFM course. Enemy number 10, lack of proper investigation into underlying problems. What does that mean? It means that the investigation of your fertility isn't often prioritized. So why is your sperm not of good quality? Why? Why, you're not getting told how to improve it at the very beginning of your journey if you're just starting, right? That was enemy number 1. But enemy number 10 is lack of proper investigation. So if your sample is poor, why? Tell me why. Oh, we can't. It could be anything. Well, we do know actually it can be a few things. So why don't we do a hormone panel? Let's start off with that. Where's my testosterone, my free testosterone at? Where's my prolactin? Why aren't we having that discussion? Let's look at that at least. Now, how about we look at some blood work? Do I have a vitamin deficiency? What's going on? Because vitamin B, vitamin D, pretty much everyone's deficient in it. And that really affects your fertility. Are you low on iron? What issues does your body have that could contribute to poor fertility? Because doing those investigations, if you pay privately, is a heck of a lot cheaper than IVF and all the stress that entails. If you can turn your hormone results around, which is entirely possible, you're going to be in such a better spot, not only for your fertility, but you're going to feel better. So why isn't that looked into? What about scans? A lot of people have variosoli, and they are essentially groups of blood vessels that clump together in your testes. And there's a scale of how big they can be, right? 1, 2, 3. 1 is the smallest, 3 the biggest. If it's a 1, not such a big deal. But if it's a 3, it is a big deal because the blood going through there, it'll be very hot. And heat is anathema to the health of sperm. And it can actually sabotage you. So why aren't people getting checkups? Why aren't people doing the scans? Just so you know, for variosoli, you can have just an optical checkup and they should be able to clear up anything. And in my humble opinion, if you've got a grade 1, it's not such a big deal. Grade 2, that's when you can start talking to your doctor more in depth about things. Of course, fact check everything I'm saying, but just bear that in mind. So that's what it can be for the male investigation. But for female, that they can really do so much stuff now. They can put ink into the reproductive organs, and they can look at blockages. They can test for endometriosis. They can, there's a whole range of technology out there that is applicable. I'm not going to go into them because there are fantastic sources of information and channels out there which will do a better job than I will regarding female fertility, hands down. So know that there are always going to be options available to you. And just know that technology is always evolving as well. So whenever you are listening to this, look at the recent studies that are being done. Okay, so I did say, 10 enemies, but actually there's an 11th one, which is not worth anything. It's just as important as the others. And I wanted to put this one in because it was so important as well. And the 11th enemy is men being sidelined throughout the IVF process. So men are often marginalized and treated as bystanders throughout the IVF journey. That's my experience. We've had a range of different clinics, range of different doctors, range of different staff deal with us, but it always feels like my wife is getting the attention, and that's right on some level. That is right. She's taking I do help her inject, but she's taking on the medication, and she's the one who's having to deal with all the turmoil, the influence of the hormones, and it is her body, right? But at the same time, we are a team, and it's not like Eva likes me being sidelined. She wants me there. She wants me there in all the doctor's appointments so that I can be there to give my 2 cents on what's going on, and perhaps sometimes take the lead with the questions, because she's can be exhausted after, as I said, ultrasounds, or perhaps she's just exhausted of the process. Maybe she had a really bad night's sleep due to medication or otherwise the night before. It can be a full range of things, and she wants me to be there as part of the team, right? But a lot of clinics, a lot of doctors, they don't see it that way. Often you do have to just sort of push yourself into the conversation a bit with questions, etc., etc. And a few stories, right? So we had a coordinator. This is a administration member of staff who's there to coordinate between you, the doctor, and to basically give you not just all the medical information, but if you're traveling from one country to the other, there's going to be a bunch of things that come up. So it can be anything from visas to any kind of advice, but whatever, right? So that's a coordinator. We had one coordinator, didn't ever look at me in the eye. All the time I had to just force myself into these conversations. She basically treated me like I wasn't even there. It was so rude and horrible. And again, we made a complaint about that. We've had times where, in doctor's appointments, Eva is spoken to again, and I've had to push myself in to the fray and just, start talking about different bits and pieces. And some practical advice about that, because you will face it. And it's not uncommon. I was speaking to a friend a little while ago about how, because his wife is pregnant, it's their first child, and he always feels like in the doctor's appointments, like he's just some tool on the side, and again, it's her body, it's her pregnancy, sure, but it's their child, and he's sidelined, and it's not the right way to approach this, because it is a team, it's a joint undertaking, literally took 2 to tango. So why is it that way? I'm not really too sure. I can't tell you why. I can just tell you that it is. Unfortunately, it does happen to a lot of people. And within the context of IVF, I would recommend that when you see a doctor for the first time, when you enter their clinic, whatever it may be, whether it's on a Zoom call or you're doing preliminary research, make it clear that you are a team and you're to be addressed and spoken to as a team. That's a really important one, just to make clear from the outset with your doctor or coordinator, whoever it may be. And you might be sidelined, but just know that you are imperative to this happening. It literally can't happen without you, and it's your life. So again, have the conversation with your wife about it before you bring it up suddenly with the doctor. And again, having her clearly okay to communicate it to the doctor and have it come from her, not just yourself, is very important. So IVF, there are 11 enemies within IVF. It doesn't just test your biology, it also tests you in such a broad range of ways, financially, emotionally, test your relationship a lot, and it will shape your life. It's a journey that isn't so often trodden. People do talk about it being more common nowadays, and this person did it, etc. And that's all well and good, but the majority of people's journeys are not the same. And to actually sit down and talk to people about it, it can be hard as well. So again, just going to encourage you to reach out to people who have done IVF, who are doing IVF. If you want to reach out to me on any of my socials, that's fantastic. I'm more than happy to speak to anybody. And although understanding these enemies don't guarantee success, they will make the journey a lot easier, a lot more comfortable, and they will increase your success rate if you're staying on top of all the decisions and using these doctors as not just doctors, but consultants, and reaching out to enough of them to help give you the best number of choices available. So that's it. So with this one, we have banged out the kind of the schematics really of your journey. We've looked to how you can resolve these various different challenges that you're going to come across, and what you can do before and what you can do during. So I hope this has been of great assistance. Do reach out if you have any questions, and I'll see you in the next episode. So happy to help you all. Take care.